Um, so welcome to our final virtual coffee hour for the semester, because the semester is almost over. Yay! Um, I think we're going to try and have another graduation social hour. Um, when is commencement? First week of May,
May 7th.
May 7th. And then maybe have one in the middle of the summer just to see how things are going. But our topic today is reading for graduate school, specifically reading for LIS graduate school. And since Anna has prepared a PowerPoint, she gets to go first. I was just going to talk off the cuff. So I believe you can share screen.
Yeah. Yes, I can share screen. So I'm going to do that. And then once, I do want to make sure that write your questions in the chat, or once we're done giving out our tips, ask us your questions, because I really do think being strategic with reading is one of the best things you can do in graduate school. So I'm going to share screen. Okay. Does that? Yeah. So I am actually sharing this screen, and it's tips adapted from Miriam E. Sweeney, and I've shared this article with my students before. It's really a blog post about just different things you can do to make sure that you're using your time to for your reading in a really strategic and thoughtful way, because we assign a lot of reading. And if you get into a topic when you're actually researching something, then you get even more reading and you get all these articles and you become overwhelmed, or at least I do. So Sweeney says that the workload increases and you're going to find yourself being expected to master 2 to 3 times more material than you have been in the past as an undergraduate. And this is especially true if you're going from an undergrad program to a grad program. And the reason why this is super problematic is that it can really paralyze you. You become so overwhelmed, you become paralyzed. So the first tip she gives, and I think this is really the most important, is you need to read strategically, not linearly. So she says that instead of cruising along the narrative, you need to dive in, find the information you need, and move along to the next stack of readings for class. So a lot of us are in grad school because we're perfectionists, and we're doing this because, we put in all our hard work and we want to make sure that we cover everything. That's not how you're going to be reading. So when you're looking at 10 articles for something, you look at them, you first look at the abstracts, and then you kind of organize them by okay, I need to read these 2 articles because they're kind of about the same thing, and then I need to read these 3. You look at the abstract, you look at the intro and the conclusion, you look at their findings, and then if you need to go back for other things, you go and you dig deeper. And you're going to keep going back and forth between articles. And then when you're writing your paper, you go to the article, you find what you need, you go back to the paper, you add it in, and then you write some more, and then you find another article, and then it's oh, this article is disputing this one. Let me reconcile this. So it's it's not linear at all. You're going to be, you need to have a purpose, and your purpose is, for example, if you're doing a case study, your purpose is to do this case study to analyze this case. So what in the articles is going to inform you, and if you're forming an argument, help you defend your stance. So the second tip that Sweeney gives is take notes. Some people are really good about this. I'm terrible at it. I have both RefWorks and Zotero accounts. And when I get really, really into my research, I sometimes forget to use my RefWorks and Zotero and make a mess for myself. And then I have notes that I've just like written down randomly. And then I'm like, what does this mean? Dr. Benoit says, and Evernote. Oops, let me go back. Sorry, I am using a different computer than I usually use because I'm at my parents' house and this is working differently. Okay, so yeah, having a note-taking system is great. Also, when you're taking notes, you want to be specific. You want to include detailed citations and page numbers for direct quotes so you don't have to chase them later. Oh, thank you, Dr. Benoit, who says that LSU Libraries does support Zotero and they have a LibGuide. Zotero is really useful. I've been using it for a few years now, and it's super useful for collaborative work. And if you keep moving on grad school, if you if in your future jobs you're expected to do research collaboratively with people, Zotero is a really great tool to have at your disposal. Okay. Be purposeful. So this goes back to the strategic reading point. Ask, what's the main argument of the piece? How does it relate to my other assigned readings? Like, what are you getting out of that reading? You don't read an article or a textbook chapter the way you would read a short story or a novel. You're not, just enjoying the writing. Because often the writing is not great. It's very straightforward and not super creative. But the reason why that is because the authors are trying to communicate with everyone in the field, including people who maybe don't have English as a first language, about their findings. So you want to see what is this article about? What are their findings? What are they trying to tell me? And how does it relate to the topic that you're discussing in that module? How does it relate to the other readings? And then this is really applicable in LIS, and that is, how do you utilize a critical perspective? And one thing and I'm really glad Miriam Sweeney includes this, and it's because our readings, especially if you're in my archives courses, they don't always agree with each other. In fact, they seem to be fighting each other. So think critically. And that doesn't mean think negatively. It means be critical about, things like positioning. And what I mean by that is, what is the point of view of this author? What's their position? How are they presenting this? What are what roles do different people play within the article? So one of the things that Sweeney suggests is thinking about who has power in this situation and who does not. Who benefits from particular social arrangements and whom do they marginalize? So critical perspectives also question assumptions and values that are implicit in arguments. What values are underlying this work? End quote. So really think critically about what is this telling me? We're not presenting the article as a full unbiased truth, because especially in 7408, for those of you who have taken that class, there's a lot of friction in archival science about what is archival theory telling us? What should we be doing? Things like the concept of appraisal. Should we be appraising documents for archives? We love to fight about those topics. So really utilize a critical perspective and think about, what is the agenda behind whoever wrote this article? And that thinking critically, I've found in, looking at student work, but also in work I've been doing myself, allows for some of the most exciting work and work Student work I get really excited about is when they're thinking critically, kind of pushing boundaries in, and not just saying like, oh, so-and-so writes that we should be appraising documents. That's great. Rather, they push back and think about what the motivations are, and they also connect other readings to it. And that makes it really exciting. So that's really all the tips I have from Miriam Sweeney. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen. And the other thing about that's not a Miriam Sweeney tip is also think about like time management. Give yourself limits for how much time you're going to spend on an article, on a set of articles, and then, you know, move on. And then when you see like, oh, this assignment means I need to go back. And then, yeah, like just give yourself time limits. Also try to set up a space that works for you. Obviously, like a kitchen table might not be the best space always, but it's the best space I have in this situation. So, you know, we make compromises, but if you're like reading and you can sequester yourself, that's great. Yeah, so those are my tips.
Thanks, Anna. I'm actually going to follow up yours. I was actually grabbing some books. Carol, do you want to go next?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
My additions are going to be relatively, well, I'll keep it brief. So one of the things also to keep in mind is, what are you reading? Are you reading a textbook? Are you reading, and everybody should get a kick out of this, a collected essays? This was on a class I took about sideshows and carnivals. Or are you reading a journal article? Because each one is written slightly differently. Now, with all three, you can do what I call, or what most people call, the graduate school skim. But the way you approach it will be different. Particularly for quantitative journal articles in LIS, you will see a pretty standard format. Introduction, literature review, methodology, data or results, discussion, conclusion, and future directions. And yes, it's all important. However, there are bits that you can skim more than read in detail. For example, you don't necessarily need to know the ins and outs of the methodology outside of, is this an appropriate methodology for this topic? Once you start seeing algorithms and equations, you don't necessarily need to know the ins and outs. Same thing with the literature review. A literature review is a great summary. However, it's better to spend the bulk of your time reading the discussion rather than the lit review. So that's a pretty typical. Now, a lot of the archival research and art and articles may be more narrative informed or follow more of a qualitative approach, which does require a little bit more reading, and it's okay. Now I can't put it into words. There are bits that you will learn, okay, the author's getting into the weeds here a little bit. I can jump over this. Whereas with a textbook textbooks are probably the easiest to do the skim because they like doing things like headings and boldface, and they're meant to be both reference and quick learning books. For example, those of you who take 7008, the other textbook, which I was hoping I could grab, really gets into the weeds on an in-depth look of how search algorithms work. You can gloss over that. And the reason you know that is if you look at the weekly content, I'm glossing over it in the weekly content. So it kind of gives you a little bit of a sense that, okay, maybe the equations are less important this week. Collected essays, treat them more like a journal article. Each chapter is usually a particular topic. It's individually written and then just put together. Yeah. Those are my additions to Anna. Carol?
Yeah, see, I'm feeling outclassed now because I was just doing some anecdotal evidence.
And abstracts are important too.
But I will go ahead and do that. He knows where I'm going. I did my graduate work at Syracuse University, which has one of the ERIC database clearinghouses. So I was an indexer abstractor for ERIC for 5 years. And we were expected to write a 50-word abstract and index an article in 15 minutes. So there was a very specific technique for doing that. And because when I started graduate school, I was, here are the readings for this week. Here's my highlighter. Start with sentence 1. Oh, that's important. Go to sentence 2. Oh, that's important too. So reading to abstract, a lot of this is what Ed just said. You look at the title. You read the first paragraph of the introduction, the last paragraph of the introduction. You read the section headings. If there's anything in bold or italic or underlined, you look at what's surrounding that. If there are tables or figures with captions, you look at the captions. Methodology, quick scan of what they're doing. You ignore the lit review completely. And then beginning of the conclusions, end of the conclusions. So I could scan an article with a pen in one hand, writing down descriptors as I was doing this. And in 15 minutes, I had a really good abstract. Well, I think they were, and adequate indexing. And I could really kind of tell you what the article was about. Now, my point here is not in any depth. I knew what the topic was and how they kind of approached it. But it got to the point that that was how I then approached articles assigned for class. I would do this first, and there were some I would put at the absolute bottom of the list because the scan kind of showed me that there wasn't much there and I should concentrate on the others first. Or if I was doing a paper and I'm looking through these 30 articles that I, Xeroxed then because the internet didn't exist. I would start going through those to do what are the ones that look most in which. So and I will tell you that the worst articles to abstract were the thought pieces that were just 20 pages of here's what I think without a section heading, without a table, without a. So on some level, I think I'm just reinforcing some of what you were saying, but again, I think it's that earlier step of I'm not at the point of what is their argument or are they disagreeing, or it's that really first rough cut. What is this even about and how are they approaching it? So that's it.
And I would note that, not to discount literature reviews entirely, they are good to go back and citation chase if you need more on a given topic. But yeah, the first pass, trust the editorial board. Hopefully they didn't let something go through.
But the other thing, and this, I'm sorry, this has nothing to do with writing an abstract. But after I did all the other stuff, then the thing that I look at a journal article is who's cited. Because if it was Carol Kulthau, it told me one thing. And if it was Dagobert Sorgel, it told me something else entirely in terms of what the approach was going to be.
And I also wanted to follow up on what Dr. Berry was saying is you aren't doing this with depth at that first pass, but and now I'm talking like purely I'm in a 7-week term, or like even if I'm in a semester long course and I have assignments, I first go, I skim these articles, I know what they're about. And then when I'm working on my assignments, that's when I use the depth, because I know exactly where to go to find the in-depth quote that's going to prove my argument, or, find the in-depth quote that like made me so mad because I disagree with this person. And then also literature reviews are actually my favorite, because when I'm writing essays, that's when I find one article that's great for this essay. Then I look at everything they've cited and look up those articles as well.
And now I'm going to wax nostalgically about Arist chapters and how much I miss them.
Oh, God, Arist chapters.
The Association of Information Science and Technology used to put out
the definitive.
Yeah, they were published books, essentially.
They were published books.
But each chapter was a gigantic literature review on a particular topic.
It is.
And it would be my first place. I don't know anything about data mining. I'm going to go read the lit review chapter on data mining. And it covers 25 years worth of data mining literature.
Yep.
And that's also how you knew you made it. If something you wrote got cited in an Arist chapter.
Yeah.
Okay, that's going a little off.
Yeah, just a little. Okay. So we're done.
So now, comments, questions,
consternations,
contemplations. I have no more alliteration after that. Or other suggestions.
Yeah, we can talk about anything you want.
If you're writing,
there might be some parameters on that.
If you're writing a bigger paper, there's always the index card system to keep track of notes, and that's essentially a analog version of Zotero. But it works. I know somebody who wrote an entire dissertation that way. It had about 10,000 index cards. Okay, we all know somebody who wrote their dissertation that way.
I was thinking of when I was coming up with my coding scheme. It was just stacks and stacks of index cards. I miss index cards. Do they still make index cards?
Yes.
They do.
They also make
miniature
whiteboards.
Okay.
With magnets. Okay. I really do not invest in this company, but I love it. I love them so much.
Okay, we're just putting on like a burlesque show at this point.
So if anyone does have questions, just let us know, because okay, awesome. People are saying things. Cheryl, you know someone who wrote a novel with index cards? That's amazing. And also hard copy and taking notes by hand. That is often easier. I it's funny that Dr. Berry mentioned using index cards for coding, because I'm in the process of writing my dissertation right now, and I use a software called Deduce for my coding. I'm finding myself printing out my transcripts, highlighting them and coding them, and then going back to Deduce to do the, like, there is something innate within me where I have to take hand notes. And I just don't know how, and like, that's okay, that's fine.
And actually, if you, one of the things I liked about using Evernote was that I could print out an article, take hand notes on it, scan it back in, and the handwriting OCR was fairly good in Evernote to recognize my own text. Now, one thing I will say about, because I'm also a hard copy person, which might surprise some people with all my digital stuff. One of the best investments I ever made was a low-end laser printer with a duplexer. So it prints on two sides of the paper. And then because the one I have is also a scanner, and it costs about $150. But I haven't changed the toner in a year. Yeah, exactly. I mean, the price per page just plummets.
I want somebody at the university paying me for the toner that I have purchased for the past year.
That's a different topic, Carol.
Okay.
Okay. Somebody just bought an e-reader. Yeah, how does the e-reader work as far as annotation? Is it good? Has anybody had experience with that?
I just bought it about 2 weeks ago, and I did a lot of comparison shopping to make sure I got one that was writing very close to handwriting. And I'm actually surprised at how comfortable it is, especially because I've always been a paper writer person. So I bought a Books Nova 3, and it's a little pricey, but it's helped so much. It's made it so much easier, especially with the tips that Miss Anna sent out for the reading, to get through it. Like, I caught up on everything I was behind on using it, and I could write on the articles like if I had printed them out, which I found, for me, it was close enough to paper that I still got the benefit of the memory reinforcement that I would usually have gotten from writing on paper.
And thank you for your comment about ink printers. That's how they make their money.
I work in that's my job, is I do computer stuff for people. Just don't buy ink printers. Don't get toner printers.
In my defense, it used to be I hardly ever printed anything at home. And then this thing happened.
Even if you never print, still get a toner one, because an ink one is going to dry up and fail if you don't print.
That's what happened.
Actually, is the solvent in it to keep the parts that do the printing soft. If you don't print, they grow hard. You have to throw it away and buy a new one.
All right.
Or you don't get that with a printer, a toner.
All right. Thank you all.
Oh, thank you for sharing that, Anna.
So I do think this is, I follow, obviously, academics on like Twitter and Instagram, and there's a few, and I think that's the e-reader they're using, and that's the one that I'm like coveting now. It does seem to be one that is useful for the purposes of reading and taking notes and being able to like have the OCR actually pick up on the notes and things like that.
Wow.
Yeah. And I think Pamela, very valid, hating e-readers is also valid. They can be frustrating too.